Thanks very much.
All right, Senator Ricketts.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Carper, and thank you, Ranking Member Capito, and thank you for our witnesses for being here today to share your perspectives. I have often talked about the Army Corps of Engineers and my problem when I was governor about their performance, from anything from how long it took them to issue permits to how they were managing water storage that actually increased the chance for flooding, and then what they were doing with regard to flood control. And so I'm anxious to use WRDA to improve the governance of the Army Corps of Engineers, and especially focusing on the fact that these projects need to be led by natural resource districts, municipalities, and local communities. Flood control, in my opinion, needs to be the first priority for the Army Corps, and especially along the Missouri River, and that they should not be undermining that. Before I get into some of this other topics, though, one of the things that the Army Corps of Engineers has rolled out is their permit finder. And as we review the permit finder, we looked at, it seems to be outdated already and lacks updates. And if we're going to be able to manage these projects, it seems we've got to have the proper information in there to be able to, and that needs to be prioritized, these tools to monitor the progress. Just for all the witnesses, I'd just love you to share your experience with the Army Corps' permit finding database, and just have you tried to navigate this, and what's been your experience? So you, Mr. Hague.
Senator, thank you for the question. I do not have experience navigating the permit finder just yet, but I'd be happy to follow up with our conservation staff on the ground to see if they've had and report back to you. That'd
be great. If you could, I'd appreciate it. Just contact our office. Just kind of what your, I'm not looking for a big, long essay. I just want to kind of know what's your experience with it. Ms. Wallace?
We've also not had experience with the permit finder database. I didn't know it existed.
Oh, okay. You didn't even know it existed. Okay, maybe that's part of the problem with the Army Corps of Engineers. They need to get that tool out there. Maybe that's why they're not updating it, because nobody knows it exists. Mr. Haas.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator. We do have a little experience with the permit finder database, and have found it actually generally to be relatively good in our case. Most of our permits and our actions that are pending are included in the database, and we're able to find those and query those well.
Well, I would also note that while I've had problems with the Army Corps in the past, the relationship between the state of Nebraska and the Army Corps is improving with the leadership we've had there for the last couple of colonels that have come in through. So that's been a good deal. I think we got Colonel Hudson, Colonel Neubauer have all done a good job. All right, so Ms. Wallace, you were talking a little bit earlier about project partnerships, especially for small local communities. How does the current PPA structure deter sponsorships? You know, in Nebraska, we have primarily natural resource districts, which we've got 23 of them across the state. They're all locally funded by property tax. How does the current PPA maybe discourage something like a small entity like that from getting involved in a PPA?
Well, exactly. I think on one side you have federal investment that meets what the local entity can put together for an important water resource project. So you have a lot of energy towards and motivation towards signing that PPA. On the flip side, you have long-term consequences of fully indemnifying the federal government and taking on perpetual O&M, basically having a federal hold on your property and your tax base. It's shifting from a larger tax base, that consequence, to a much smaller tax base for a project that's in the national interest. So that comment earlier rang true. Who is that tax base, and can they afford it, the project?
Right, so maybe you can expand upon that a little bit, just about if you're a small taxing base and you're attempting a big project and you have to take on full liability for the operations and the maintenance, as well as any sort of problems, especially, you said, right, 35% the way through the project, you're actually taking this on. Talk about that a little bit more, if you could. Like, have you seen specific instances of that where communities or small entities have said, hey, we're not going to do this because it's just too much?
We certainly have organizations.
Oh, your microphone.
Oops, sorry, excuse me. We have had states, organizations, entities say they cannot sign up project partnership agreements because of the unknown cost and time of that cost, the reason for that cost, and what that means for them long-term financially.
And in your estimation, would some of these projects be in the national interest as you've described before?
Correct.
Yeah. So the idea here is that we've got small entities where you're taking the local property taxpayers, in the case of Nebraska, would have to take on these huge responsibilities to be able to meet the current requirements, and that's just not going to be possible sometimes. So maybe projects that are in the national interest are not being done because of the requirement to have that local participation. Is that fair?
That's exactly correct.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wallace. Again, I think that Mr. Haas also mentioned this about just the flexibility, having flexibility with the Corps. Certainly my experience as governor was the Corps often has its rules and does not feel like it has the flexibility to be able to change those, to get up the chain of command, takes time, all that sort of thing. So I think there's some opportunities here for us to be able to take a look at that and see what we can do. And I appreciate your comment about having the local districts have more flexibility in negotiating these agreements, because they're the ones that are on the ground there. And certainly when you've got local entities, they know exactly what their communities need. So I think more flexibility would also help us be able to get that done faster. So